The things that destroy civilizations are usually the ones that you never see coming. When Deng Xiaoping instituted China's one-child policy in 1979, it seemed to make perfect sense. It seemed to be a reasonable response to the overpopulation and starvation that had been happening in China for many years. And Deng Xiaoping was probably the best leader that China has had in 100 years. And this one decision, more than any other, has ensured the destruction of the Chinese civilization in the relatively near future. In decades, not centuries, China, as we know it, will cease to exist. When the colonists left Europe to establish what would become the United States, they brought with them a number of very important lessons, but one above all. And this is why it's not a coincidence that it's in the First Amendment. Our founders realized that if you were more concerned about offending people than you were about getting to the truth, your society, in the long run, could not function. They also realized that government is possibly the worst arbiter of what is good speech and what is bad speech. Compare that to this recent quote from the Chancellor of Germany. "Freedom of speech ends here when speech is used to attack human dignity and the Constitution." Now, I guess that sounds innocuous to the Germans. It doesn't sound innocuous to me. Whose dignity? By what definition? Under what conditions? What is dignity anyway? Does dignity require you to call a biological man a woman, even though the person is still a biological man? I'm sure the Pakistani gangs that were roaming and targeting white women in England until just recently would have been offended at being called what they actually are. And the person who shone a light on this insanity, Elon Musk, he probably would have been arrested if not for his fame and social power. Maybe that's why the police turned a blind eye to these crimes for so very long. You can't use speech to attack the Constitution? What if there's a mistake in the Constitution? How exactly are you going to improve if you're afraid to speak? In recent years, these laws have gotten broader and broader, and now covering private communications as well as public. Under these laws, the UK alone arrests about 12,000 people every year for speech that it considers to be unacceptable. In one of these so-called crimes, a grandmother was arrested for silently holding a sign outside an abortion clinic that read, "Coercion is a crime, here to talk if you want." Arrested. Not long ago, the wife of a conservative politician was sentenced to 31 months in prison for what police said was an unacceptable post. Not long thereafter, a child molester was sentenced to 21 months in prison. A recent poll found that almost 60% of Britons had stopped themselves from expressing political or social views because of the fear of retribution. There's a logical hole in Europe's approach to free speech that you could drive a truck through. Yet most Europeans are just fine being told what they can and cannot say. And I guess that's really the crux of the matter. Most Europeans in their hearts are collectivists, not individualists. If you're more concerned about what the collective thinks than individual rights, naturally, you're going to end up in the position that Europe finds itself in today. Now, I wish I could just wag my finger at the Europeans, shake my head, and leave it at that, but alarmingly, politicians on both sides of the aisle here in the United States seem to have lost the plot when it comes to free speech. The Supreme Court gave Joe Biden a free pass for his overt censorship of free speech during COVID. They're now, as far as I can tell, turning a blind eye to Donald Trump's infringement on free speech on a number of fronts. You'll hear a lot of people, Democrats mostly, saying that the Constitution has become outdated and needs to be ignored because it's no longer relevant to today's society. What I say to that is thank heavens for the Constitution and the First Amendment. If Democrats and some Republicans didn't have that amendment staring them right in the face every time they try to tell you what you can and can't say, can you even imagine what our free speech landscape would look like today?